Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Woolfolk again. Woolfolk the other way at the 30, the 40. Woolfolk to midfield. Miles Woolfolk with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Now, one fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Howe showing the toughness for 6.
Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right.
Goes to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag.
Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll it apart.
Oh, now he's going to throw it and score! Grayson May throws it to Paytor in the end zone for the touchdown. May thrown it left-handed. Was walking out on the run and threw it left-handed. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading in with Barshot. Theo at the 35. Theo, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Theo, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome to another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. And tonight, once again, solo, it is time for another recruiting edition of the podcast as the Tar Heels have landed 4 commitments since the last time that we were on here, all of them during my time in Orlando. And so that was the reason I wasn't able to get on here earlier, enjoying a family vacation. Now we come to you here on a Saturday night. Was going to plan on doing it last night, but just got back incredibly late. Carolina baseball was in the midst of their College World Series, which I think on the last edition of the podcast, I was so cranked up about the Brendan Sorsby of it all in that situation that I did not congratulate Tar Heel baseball, the Diamond Heels, for making it to Omaha. What a amazing run they've had so far to this point. That game, that series really against USC was just absolutely phenomenal. And so now Carolina, with a come-from-behind win last night, they advance on to the winner's bracket in Omaha. They'll play West Virginia in the next round. And, of course, we want to wish Carolina baseball all the success. We'll be definitely keeping an eye on that here over the next couple of weeks. But we got to talk a little Tar Heel football recruiting here tonight. We'll break down those 4 prospects that Carolina's landed since the last time that we've been on here. Also, we do have an official visit weekend that is going on right now, but there was a guy that was on campus in the middle of this week, a little bit of a surprise name that popped onto the radar late and jumped on campus, and then it was reported after his visit that he was on campus. So we have all the information that you need to know on that front. And then the guys that are on campus this weekend, will have a look at where Carolina sits with a lot of the guys that are currently on campus. As of right now, these are the ones that we know are for sure on campus. There are some guys that were originally scheduled to be on campus a while back. There were a lot of guys that were expected to be on campus probably as early as last weekend. But during this week, there have been a ton of commitments. So there may be other guys that are on campus that are trying to keep it quiet because they are committed to other schools. But as of right now, just 9 guys on campus this weekend, a much smaller group than Carolina's had in the last handful of weeks. And so we'll tell you about that. Only one more official visit weekend to go for Carolina before they shut it down and start getting prepared for the upcoming season. And so that will be when we will shift our focus to the player, the position group previews and all that stuff, but still plenty of recruiting stuff coming out here over the next couple of weeks. And then hopefully in the weeks to come after that with some commitments from Carolina stemming from this month. All right, let's start out with the guy. We're going to go chronologically. We'll go with the guys that Carolina has landed. And oddly enough, it almost goes in the direction of the highest rated guys a little bit until we get to the end here when it comes to the offensive linemen. But it started with Zyke Scott, who is now the new player. He committed to Carolina over Georgia Tech, who he announced as one of his top two back on May 29th following his official visit to Chapel Hill. He said that he was down to two schools. Colorado was the other school that he was expected to take an official visit to entering the month. That did not happen. And of course, the visit to Georgia Tech clearly didn't show him enough for him to make his decision to commit there. And so he ends up as a Tar Heel commit. Scott is a 6'1", 220-pound linebacker who is preparing for his senior season at LaSalle College High School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is rated as the number 531 overall prospect in the class and the number 45 linebacker in the 2027 class, according to Rivals Industry rankings. This is a nice pickup for Carolina just in terms of the ratings. A guy that at one time was inside of the top 500. There's a couple of them that we're going to talk about him here, here, and then the guy that ended up committing right after him. Both of these guys at one time were inside of the top 500, and they've since fallen. So take that for whatever you think it's worth. I think to me that shows you that these guys have the talent. They probably are, guys that could be considered blue chip prospects. But as we've told you here in the past, we usually look at the top 500 as those guys. So Carolina is still without a guy that's labeled as a blue chip prospect, according to how we used to do it in the past, me and Zach Hubbard, when we would break down these recruits. But at the same time, I still like what you're getting from both him and Aaron Williams, who we'll tell you about here in a minute. When I looked at Zyke's film and broke it down, definitely a downhill linebacker that brings some nice athleticism to the table, does a good job of consistently shedding blocks to be able to make tackles in the gaps that he is covering, and is a strong wrap-up tackler. The athleticism shows up when he drops into coverage, something we would love to see a little bit more of here on his senior film. Guess you don't want him doing it too much because you don't want him to basically just be a guy. At that point, you might as well be a defensive back. But I'd like to see it a little bit more. I think we saw it like 2 or 3 times. Look pretty good dropping back into coverage. Has a high motor that is shown by how he runs down plays from behind, something that we've talked about so often when it's come to Bill Belichick recruits on the defensive side of the football. I look at this as a promising addition to the linebacking core, and I think it's one that could pay dividends if he is developed right. I really like what you see from him. You don't see, a ton of physicality in the way that he plays. Maybe that's an area that you'd like to see him improve just a little bit, but mostly everything is there that you want to see. I mean, he's a guy that is able to get to ball carriers and make plays when he needs to. Not a high volume guy in terms of the numbers that he put up, the stats that he put up this past season. I think that's probably what a lot of people are looking for when they look at the stats. Can you find a guy that puts up huge numbers? That's where you've got Tasheem Butler. That's the type of player that he is. And, look, we're playing at the 6A state level in the state of Pennsylvania is not necessarily the easiest. You're definitely facing some pretty good competition there. And so I think it probably is a little bit more difficult to stack up those tackles. Also, when you do this for a while, you learn that there are some schools that really will fudge the stats, will give guys more tackles than they actually had. Not saying that's what happened with Tasheem Butler. You never know. He could be a guy that's just an absolute monster in terms of the number of tackles that he piles up. If I remember, his highlight film was pretty long. So definitely a guy that probably finished with more tackles than Scott did this past year. But there's other schools that do a really good job of making sure that they credit guys the right way for tackles. So even still, I mean, you look at Zyke Scott, 58 total tackles, 9 tackles for loss, a very healthy number for an inside linebacker, a forced fumble, and 1 pass breakup. And so he's a guy that kind of lives behind the line of scrimmage. That's the type of guy that you're looking for to go along with what you're getting in Aaron Williams. And that's who we'll transition to next. You know, Aaron Williams is a guy that I look at and really like the most out of anybody in this class, you know, at the linebacker position. I think all 3 linebackers have their value that they bring to the table, but I really, really like what you see from Aaron Williams. He committed via social media on Wednesday morning, commits to Carolina over Mississippi State and Colorado, amongst others. Those were the schools that he was officially visiting. Mississippi State really did a good job of setting a pretty good precedent right out of the gate back on May 29th when he officially visited there. That was an official visit that originally he was not even scheduled to take. And so many people believed that with that visit, they were in a really good spot for him. But instead, it's Carolina who blows him away enough to be able to get his commitment. And look, he's a 6'2", 195-pound linebacker who hails from Ridgepoint High School in Missouri City, Texas. Immediately, there are going to be people that are going to look at that and probably be concerned about the weight. I'm not necessarily that concerned. Can he be a guy that adds, you know, maybe 20 pounds to that frame, keeps some of the speed and athleticism that he has? If he can, then that's great. Then he's going to be a perfect fit for Carolina at the linebacker spot. If not, I mean, yeah, maybe it takes him a little bit of time to add that weight. Maybe he's a guy that, you know, doesn't necessarily contribute early on, but eventually becomes a part of what Carolina wants to do. Regardless, this is the type of risk that you have to take. He's the number 536 overall prospect and number 46 linebacker in the 2027 class. According to Rivals industry rankings. These are industry rankings that are updated as of today. I looked them up. So, you know, if it has changed since then it literally changed within the last handful of hours. But, you know, Williams is a guy that I think a lot of people have to be excited about landing. I mean, again, you know, Kansas State was a team that was in on his recruitment at one time. There's a few other big offers that he has. So this was somebody that had a pretty extensive offer list. I know that Carolina fans are looking for the Tar Heels to beat out teams like Georgia, some of the big hitters, Alabama, you know, teams that they've beaten out in the past for recruits. That's just not what this staff is doing. They're looking for guys that are more diamonds in the rough, guys that they feel like they can develop, probably have a little bit of an edge, a little bit of a chip on their shoulder because of where they're ranked. And I think Williams could definitely be that type of guy. Measures in, as I said, at 6'2", 195 pounds. So a little bit undersized as a linebacker, but certainly someone that you can put the weight on here at some point in his college career. He has really good speed for a linebacker, which allows him to play sideline to sideline, and he plays aggressive downhill when he needs to make plays at or near the line of scrimmage. So I think this is the perfect fit alongside of Zyke Scott, who is really just a downhill type of guy. He's not someone that shows that ability to play sideline to sideline. Maybe it's there for him. I saw that he was pretty athletic. With Williams, he's definitely a guy that shows it on film. He can really cover sideline to sideline, and that's what you're looking for at the linebacker position, to go alongside of someone that really is focused on getting into the backfield and making plays in the run game. His coverage skills are strong. Zyke Scott, I think his coverage skills look pretty good, especially for a linebacker. Williams, it's not for a linebacker. Williams, his coverage skills are really just strong in general. I think, when he opens his hips, his ability to change direction looks very, very smooth, especially for a linebacker. Probably a guy that's so good that he could play the safety position if he needed to. He could be that hybrid linebacker safety that we saw Greg Smith be this past year. Does a great job of making plays on the football when he needs to as well. Some of that is really, him laying the wood in the middle of the field, hitting guys hard that come over the middle. But the other part of it is that he's a guy that does a really good job of getting his hands on the football and knocking the ball down if it's in his area. I think that's something that you really like too. You want to see these linebackers not only be able to make guys pay that come over the middle, but find a way to affect those passes that are coming over the middle. I think that's exactly what you see. He's a secure tackler who does a good job of tackling low. A lot of tackles are around the legs and everything like that. That's the smartest area to try to tackle someone instead of trying to match them in terms of strength up high. That's what leads to a lot of missed tackles. You don't see that with him. And he likes to hit hard, as I said, when he gets the opportunity to. That's not only in the passing game, that's in the running game as well. This is a nice addition to the linebacking core, and it's one that I feel like is going to grow into a key piece for Carolina. Now, again, the weight is going to be the most important thing. Can they put it on him to be able to stick him at linebacker? But I think there's a chance that he could play that hybrid safety linebacker position if he can prove that his coverage skills really are that good. I think they are, and so I'm going to be very interested to see how exactly he ends up slotting in for Carolina. I think regardless, you've got a player that is going to make a difference on the defensive side of the ball. Don't look at his rating. Just watch the tape and really learn a little bit about this kid. And I think you'll be someone that really enjoys to watch what he does, how he does it, and really see some of the upside to him. And that's what I think both of these pickups really are. They are upside pickups. There's other guys that are pure upside, but these are guys that have talent and have the upside. So they can develop into really good players. Again, this goes back to one of the things that we've talked about with this staff that they are showing you now they have to do a better job of than what Mack Brown was able to do. Mack Brown did a great job of being able to bring in the high-level recruits. He just didn't do a great job of developing them at certain times. That's part of the reason why Carolina wasn't as successful as they needed to be when he was on campus. It's why they ended up moving on from him. Bill Belichick is taking a completely different approach. He's not looking for these highly rated prospects. They are still interested in a lot of these guys, but they're not competing as well in a lot of these recruitments. And so now the development that was important when he first came in is even more important now with these types of guys. And so you're going to have to find a way to develop this group. These will be the guys that hopefully, will develop under him and will eventually become key pieces for Carolina because they put the work in. And maybe that's what he's looking for, because there were guys last year that they brought in the transfer portal that it felt like just had the attitude that they were great players. Hopefully these guys don't take that same approach, because as you saw last year, those guys that took that approach, that didn't necessarily pan out to be the case. Some of the names that I heard in the preseason that were taking that type of approach, that were talking like that, were guys that at the end of the season, Carolina was almost kind of relieved to be able to move on from, or at least as a Tar Heel fan, I was pretty relieved to be able to move on from. So, we'll see ultimately what they end up doing with these guys. But yes, development is going to be incredibly key. It's going to be key when it comes to a guy like Neil Roberts, the interior offensive lineman who committed to the Tar Heels on Wednesday evening, commits to Carolina over South Florida, Georgia State, and Appalachian State. Roberts is a 6'3", 305-pound interior offensive lineman who is preparing for his senior year at Winona High School in Winona, Mississippi. He was named a first-team All-State member for his efforts in 2025. He is the number 1,797 overall prospect and the number 164 interior offensive lineman in the 2027 class, according to Rivals industry rankings. This is one of those guys at a position where Carolina has done a really good job of establishing themselves as the leader with a lot of different guys. They had to make a decision. They had to narrow down their group and really figure out who they feel fits them the best. And they did that with a couple other guys that they landed in this class. We talked about Chavez Dixon and how important that is for Carolina. getting him in there. That becomes even more important this weekend with him on campus, as we'll tell you about a little bit later. You have Lauifi Tosai, who Carolina has, that is committed as of right now. Something that is very interesting is on social media during this past week. His dad did tweet out that there was some renewed belief in his son from Stanford. So that's certainly a team to watch here over the next handful of weeks and months. If he doesn't end up flipping his commitment here this summer, could be a guy that ends up flipping down the line. And it's why Carolina probably has to keep recruiting these positions. You look at what Neil Roberts brings to the table, and initially the ranking probably just scares a lot of people away and probably has them saying, why would Carolina go after a piece like this? Especially a guy that the other schools you're landing him over are South Florida, Georgia State, and Appalachian State. Look, I'm not one of the guys that is a part of this group that evaluates these guys along the offensive line. I watched a decent amount of the offensive linemen that I thought Carolina should have been after in this class. There are a lot of guys that are different now, so I haven't seen nearly as much film on those guys, if any, on some of the guys that Carolina is recruiting right now. But the thing that I will say is when I threw on his film, I did think he was a guy that was probably a little bit better than his ranking. First of all, he's a versatile piece along the offensive line. Inside Carolina reported that last year he spent time at both guard and center. This year spent the majority of his junior season at left tackle, also played a little bit of right tackle, meaning that he has taken extensive snaps pretty much all along the offensive line. He's very impactful in the run game, consistently driving defenders back off the line of scrimmage and throwing them to the ground. He has plenty of physicality, but you would like to see him add a little bit more to his initial punch when he gets to the college level. So, yeah, eventually the physicality sort of sets in. He's able to wear guys down as they get down the field and eventually knock them to the ground. The initial punch, that's not where you see. There's some guys, if you watch these highlight tapes at the high school level, there's pancake after pancake, and it's literally just them off the line of scrimmage initially just punching and knocking guys down to the ground. You don't see that with Roberts. So you want to see him get a little bit stronger in that upper body, but at the same time, he does everything that he needs to do. He does a really good job of staying engaged with these guys to be able to knock them out of the hole or out of the gap that he is supposed to be pushing them away from. The thing is that you don't see him necessarily climb to the second level. Would love to see a little bit more of that, him sort of discard certain guys. That's something that I think you learn more as you go to the higher levels. That, yes, pancake blocks are great. They're awesome. They're great highlight film stuffers and everything like that. But when you can climb to the second level, those are plays that people really enjoy as well, being able to go from a defensive end, push him out of the way, wash him out of the play, whatever, and then get to that second level and get a hat on a linebacker or a safety, something like that. So I'd love to see more of that from him, maybe in his senior film. As I said, with the initial punch, that's an area that he's got to get better, but I think it's certainly somewhere that he can improve. In pass protection, he handles his own. But it is probably best that he moves inside to guard because he doesn't look very natural when he's moving laterally against some of the defensive ends that are a little bit speedy, against some of the defensive ends that just are bendy around the edges, stuff like that. Even some of the guys that aren't necessarily shining in those areas. There were times where he just didn't look like, you watch the footwork and it didn't look supernatural. It didn't look like he was a guy that is used to doing that too often. I think guard probably serves him a little bit better. And if he can crank that physicality up just a little bit more, that upper body strength, not even really the level of physicality, but just the upper body strength, then I really think he's going to fit very well inside there. I think this is another upside pickup for Carolina, but he is a guy with a very promising frame And I think he has a work ethic that the staff can work with. I think he's going to be someone that's motivated. Being a guy that is as lowly rated as he is, coming out of the state of Mississippi. And I think part of that, I think that's part of it. I think the fact that he comes from the state of Mississippi, which is not necessarily known as a recruiting hotbed, I do think is part of the reason why he isn't necessarily getting ranked all that high. But remember, this was an all-state guy. So he's someone that really stood out amongst everybody else in the state of Mississippi at the offensive tackle spot. Again, I think he's going to kick inside, but that really does say something, especially at offensive tackle, because that's a position that you got a lot of star players at. When you are the best offensive lineman on your team in high school, there's a good chance that you are going to play offensive tackle. And so for him to stand out enough to be an all-state player, I think does say something. And hopefully that's some upside that he's able to build on when he gets to Chapel Hill. I think the fact that he was recruited that he was kind of lightly recruited by some of the bigger schools, wasn't necessarily looked at as a high-end prospect. It's probably something that concerns a lot of people. But, these are guys, you never know who's going to turn into a great player. There are guys that Carolina has recruited in the past. Now, a lot of them are in-state prospects, and I think that's part of the reason why it's been easier to stomach some of these guys. But there have been guys in the past that haven't been the highest-rated prospects that Carolina's brought in and have turned into really good players. I think right now, Carolina's trying to take as many bites of the apple as they can at the interior offensive line spot and find somebody that eventually sticks. Even if, the other guys in this class don't necessarily become part of the rotation, you can always go back and fill those needs in the transfer portal, in future classes, everything like that. But I think it's definitely a key position that Carolina's been looking at in this class. And they've got, one guy who's highly rated in Chavez Dixon. They've got a couple of other guys who are two of the lower rated prospects. And it's going to be all about development. Again, going back to that word, it's going to be about development with those guys to be able to take them to the level that they need to be to make an effect at at the college level, coming up from not being the highest rated prospects in college. With his commitment, didn't talk about this with the linebacker spot, but I will talk about it here in just a second. But with his commitment, look, normally I would say Carolina's done. I would say that Carolina's probably not going to recruit another interior offensive lineman. You got 3 guys there already in this class. I think that's the number they probably end up taking. But as I mentioned, with Lauifi Tosai, I don't know for sure that Carolina believes he is going to stick with his commitment. So this is one of those ones where Carolina, I think, has to stay vigilant. They have to make sure that they are keeping an eye out for all these other guys. Cooper Hodson, who is a guy out of the state of North Carolina here, out of the Charlotte area, plays for Providence Day High School, is currently on campus. Talk a little bit more about him later on. But that's a guy that Carolina is keeping an eye on. There could be other names that enter the running eventually for Carolina that maybe they wanted to recruit, this summer, that they could recruit during the season. But until Tosai feels like he is 100% committed, I don't think Carolina is going to shut down their pursuit of interior offensive linemen. And even if he does end up locking down that commitment, I think Carolina is still looking for some higher rated guys that are interested in getting into the fold. This offseason, it can't be easy to recruit guys this offseason, coming off the year that you had. It's hard to sell. I mean, we're talking about when we talk about the in-season stuff, we've been talking about between me and Josh, the issues that Carolina's having on selling fans on this upcoming season. So what do you think it's like being a recruit? Somebody that is going to basically commit 4 years of your life, or at least that's what you're thinking in your mind when you end up making the commitment. You're committing, 4 years or however many years you believe that you'll be committing to Carolina. You're committing those years to Bill Belichick and the staff that at this point has not proven that they can win at this level. So it's not going to be easy to recruit that position. Hopefully, Carolina can start winning some games during the year. And maybe this is one of those positions where you find a guy or two, maybe even someone you've previously recruited that says, you know what, that offer from Carolina looks a little bit different now later in the season with them winning some games. Maybe I am going to flip my commitment to them. That's what Carolina, I think, is ultimately hoping to see at that position. Linebacker, I think they're probably done. I would be shocked if they don't hold on to the guys that they've got at the linebacker spot. Maybe they are recruiting over a guy like Tasheen Butler at some point, but I doubt they are recruiting over guys like Zyke Scott and Aaron Williams. I feel like they value both of those guys, and they're going to make sure that they can hold on to them. But for now, linebacker is a spot that is shut down. They don't have anybody on campus this weekend that is a linebacker besides Theo Wilson, who is a 4-star prospect. So maybe that is a little bit of recruiting over some of the guys at that position. But other than that, they do not have anybody else. I don't believe there's anybody that's scheduled for June 19th next weekend that is a linebacker. I think they're pretty secure with the group that they have. They're just trying to see if they can steal away a 4-star, a guy that's firmly a 4-star prospect in Theo Wilson, away from a team like Louisville, who has been trending for him, and then Virginia, who also has him visiting. We'll talk a little bit more about Theo Wilson here coming up, because we got to tell you about Carolina's last commitment that they landed in the 2027 class. It's another one along the offensive line. Committed on Thursday morning, that would be 3-star offensive tackle Hudson Inglesby. He commits to Carolina over Kansas State, Virginia, Florida State, and others. Williams is a 6'6", 287-pound offensive tackle who hails from White Plains High School in Anniston, Alabama. He was awarded first-team All-County honors for his efforts, but played on a White Plains team that was just frankly awful last year at 3-7. Thing is that he is an outstanding wrestler as well, who finished his junior season with a 41-0 record and won an Alabama State High School Athletic Association 1A-4A title in the 285-pound classification. He is rated as the number 829 overall prospect and the number 62 offensive tackle in the 2027 class, according to Rivals industry rankings. Now, Rivals rankings themselves, they rate him as a 4-star. There are a few sites that believe in him a little bit more, or I should say a couple of sites that believe in him a little bit more. I know 24/7's composite rankings have him as a 4-star prospect. I think that's, again, heavily based on Rivals rankings, but this is one of those guys that I think you look at the frame, it's there. There's no question about that. 6'6". You can add some more weight to him at 287 pounds. You probably want him right there at the 300-pound mark, somewhere in that area, if you're going to keep him at the offensive tackle spot. And there are some things to really like about him. Another athletic guy, somebody that really can move for an offensive tackle. The athleticism really shows up on the film when he's out in space, especially on screenplays. He is also, someone who displays it the way that he moves in pass protection, which allows him to stay in front of edge rushers. Thought he did a really good job of that. Again, a thing that is constantly said about offensive linemen, especially offensive tackles at the high school level. You always want to see more pass protection film from him, but that's probably not going to happen, especially for a team that's 3-7. You're probably not going to see a lot of pass protection film, but every time that you saw him, he looks very natural. I talked about with Neil Roberts not looking very natural, moving back into his stance, staying in front of guys, just moving laterally in general. I don't think you see that at all from Hudson Inglesby. I think you see a guy that moves very well. The thing is that once he gets his hand on defenders, the wrestling background shows up as he's constantly just wrestling guys to the ground and piling up pancake blocks. That's what you want to see, is a guy that when he gets his hands on you, he's able to find a way to get you to the ground. Again, would love to see him climb to the second level a little bit more. You do see that ability to be able to do that with the screen plays where he might, end up chipping a guy, but then immediately gets to that second level, gets a hat on a linebacker, corner, safety, someone in space, and creates a big play. But, the thing that you like to see is that the physicality is definitely there. You don't have to worry about that. You almost never have to worry about that with guys that have a wrestling background. Not going to have to worry about it with a guy that has a 41-0 record as a wrestler. He's going to be a guy that is going to be able to consistently find ways to get guys on the ground. And so I really like that ability for Carolina because you're looking at guys that can do that. This past year, didn't have many guys at the offensive tackle spot that could do that. Now, the interesting thing is that, where are you going to play Inglesby? Is he going to be a guy that you're looking to play more at left tackle or right tackle? Played exclusively at left tackle his senior year from what I could see on his film. So that means that he's a guy that's comfortable with going to his left. How comfortable is he going to his right? Some people would say how big of a deal really is that. It really is a huge difference. I forget who the offensive lineman is that said it. Walker Mail, who is a guy that I work with at WFNZ in Charlotte. If you're watching on those feeds, you know exactly who I'm talking about. He is someone who has said before, he's heard from an offensive lineman, that it's like wiping with the other hand. It's very difficult. It's not something that just comes to you automatically. So I'd be interested if he's a guy that they are looking to play at right tackle. How familiar is he with playing that right tackle spot? And is he a guy that's going to be able to transition there very easily? Like I said, probably going to have to add more weight to the frame, but the frame I think is really perfect. And I think when you look at it, you're hoping that you can add just a little bit more strength there. I think the wrestling background definitely helps, but you'd like to add just a little bit more strength there. Might have to clean up some things. Technically, he's not perfect, but certainly a guy that I think you can work with. I think this is something that, the staff is hoping that they can bring out of him when he gets to Carolina. I really like the pickup out of the guys that Carolina was going after at the offensive tackle spot. I think this was one of the better options that you could have gotten. The thing about him is that didn't really hear a lot about him. And that might be why some people are saying, well, we don't really know a lot about him, so why should we be excited? Well, he was a guy whose recruitment just was very silent. He wasn't someone that was talking to a lot of these different sites. And to be honest with you, I don't know how much I would want to talk to these sites either, with the amount of talking that you have to do with these schools. These guys get just bombarded when they're going through this process. And so for him, with it being a more silent recruitment, I think that was really why Tar Heel fans probably didn't know a whole lot about him when he got here. Still feel like this is a good pickup for the Tar Heels. When you look at the offensive tackle spot, it feels like Carolina, probably would like to add maybe one more in this class. I mean, you've only got one guy that's committed at the offensive tackle spot as of right now, unless you're going to let Tosai or Neil Roberts play that position. I think Chavez Dixon pretty locked in as an interior offensive lineman, but look, you haven't really been able to get a lot of other offensive tackles to campus. The other ones that you were looking at that could potentially get to campus, a lot of them have gone elsewhere. And so, you look, now you've got Kelsey Adams, the offensive tackle out of Langston Hughes High School in Fairburn, Georgia, that is still expected to visit. You're hoping that you were able to make some sort of big impression on Khalil Johnson out of Archbishop Malheur High School in Cincinnati, Ohio. There's no indication that Carolina did, but there's no indication that they didn't either. It feels like Carolina is still in the running for him. Those are the two big names that you're looking at right now and that you're hoping maybe you can find a way to be able to get one of those guys committed. Everybody else, I think Carolina is pretty much out on. There was a chance that they were going to get Patrick O'Brien to campus. That chance went out the window when he committed in the middle of this past week to Purdue. That was another guy out of Archbishop Malheur High School that it feels like Carolina was really wanting. Moreno Fisher, guy that was an in-state prospect that you had as a possibility at one time earlier this offseason, didn't end up making his official visit to you. He ended up committing this past week to Virginia. So that's one of those options that seems to be off the table. Maybe you circle back around with him later on. But really, it looks like, they're trying to go for a big fish here at the offensive tackle spot, either Adams or Johnson. But in order to land one of those guys, LSU, the favorite for both of those guys right now, LSU favored to flip Kelsey Adams, who is still committed to Georgia as of right now. And there's many people that believe that Khalil Johnson could be going there as well. One of those two guys, they probably aren't getting both. So one of those two guys is probably going to be looking elsewhere. Hopefully, Carolina is the one that is able to jump in and capitalize with one of those two guys and maybe find a way to walk away with a big-time commitment at the offensive tackle spot. All right, we move on to the midweek visitor for Carolina that sort of surprised everybody. That would be 4-star safety Kennedy Green. And Carolina is now firmly in the middle of his recruitment after they hosted him for this official visit. He officially visited starting on Wednesday, left on Friday, and the Tar Heels have now, according to an article that was written last night on Inside Carolina, they have now joined his top schools list. It is now a top 4, along with Mississippi State, South Carolina, and Nebraska. Those were the 3 schools that he was down to. But Carolina made a nice impression on him and are at least now in the running to be able to land him. Last year, he had 56 total tackles, 2 interceptions as a junior at Douglas County High School in Mableton, Georgia. This would be one of those guys that would be a pretty nice surprise for Carolina to be able to land. I think a lot of people, didn't know this name coming into the week. I was certainly one guy that wasn't necessarily aware of Carolina's interest in him, but this would be the type of guy that I think Carolina is looking for at the safety position, and they need someone at that safety position. I think it's a spot that they need to at least bring in one guy. We talked about how Coleman Bryson is leaving after the season is done. I'd like to get at least one freshman in there to fill that scholarship spot. Maybe eventually you go into the transfer portal and land some guys there, but we know that's a spot that, can have some pretty nice attrition or some pretty decent attrition to it once you get into the offseason as well. Guys get, a little discontent with having to sit behind certain guys. And it looks like Greg Smith is going to be someone who's going to have a big role for Carolina at the safety position this upcoming season. There's going to be a few other guys that are going to be taking away snaps from the other players at these spots that will be playing probably significant snaps there to go along with Coleman Bryson, who is probably going to be a starter, and Greg Smith. So, Carolina's got to make sure that they have everything covered at this position. Getting at least one commitment here, I think, would be the preferred destination or the preferred route for Carolina. The only other guys that you look at, we talked about Alan Blackshear not visiting this weekend, ended up committing last week, in the middle of last week after we did that edition of the podcast where we talked so much about him being a guy that Carolina really needed to knock it out of the park with this weekend. He ends up committing to Connecticut, who he took an official visit to last weekend. And so he's off the table now. And so it's down to 2 guys. Kennedy Green, who Carolina just jumped in on this week, and Marcus Jones. And look, Carolina could have been doing some background work with a guy like Kennedy Green. Maybe this has been something they've been back channeling for a while, but as far as we know, this is when Carolina jumped in on his recruitment. Guy that's ranked inside of the top 350, ranked number 328 nationally, number 29 in terms of his position. South Carolina is the heavy favorite to land him at this point. According to Rivals prediction machine, they have him as a 93.3% chance to land with South Carolina. Part of that is he has visited South Carolina a ton, took his official visit there back in May. Now, one thing that you would wonder with that is how impactful was that official visit if he is visiting elsewhere. Nebraska is a school that at some point I believe has gotten an official visit. They do not have it listed on the website for Rivals, but let's look at 24/7 Sports here real quickly to see if they have him having taken an official visit there. They do not either. So that's very interesting how he has them in his top schools group, but has not given them an official visit. Mississippi State going to close everything out. That'll be next weekend. So they'll hope to make some sort of impression on him. But Carolina hopefully was able to make a big enough impression on him this weekend to really get themselves in consideration and maybe be on the precipice of landing. I think the fact that South Carolina had such a big lead, but he is taking official visits to other schools shows you that there is opportunity here. Now it's, can Carolina capitalize on it? I think that's going to be really interesting to see whether they did over the next week or so. He is a guy that was expected to make his commitment on July 11th. We'll see if he ends up sticking to that or if he ends up committing earlier. So yeah, over the next handful of weeks, I should say, not week, but over the next handful of weeks, he should be a guy that hopefully Carolina can get a little bit more information about and maybe find a way to end up landing him when it is all said and done. That would be huge for the Tar Heels in this class. All right, now we move on to this weekend. Who are the guys that are on campus currently? Where is Carolina standing with some of these guys? We'll tell you about that here real quickly. It starts with two committed prospects, interior offensive lineman Chavez Dixon, who we talked about a little bit earlier out of Lee County High School in Leesburg, Virginia, and Trey Johnson, the three-star cornerback out of Steele High School in Cibolo, Texas. Crazy thing about Trey Johnson, this is his first ever visit to Carolina. Yes, he is one of those guys that committed to Carolina without ever having taken an official or a visit at all there. And so now him being on his official visit here, along with Chavez Dixon, both of those guys will have a chance to be able to recruit for Carolina. Hopefully they will have some sort of influence on the guys that are currently there on campus. That will be a very nice asset to have if you are the Tar Heels, to have both of those guys who just recently committed, especially Chavez Dixon, who feels like he's going to be one of those guys that's going to be very vocal, very involved in trying to help recruit a lot of guys to Carolina. The group that is on campus outside of them, you have two guys that it appears Carolina is probably in the lead for at this point. That would be three-star running back Senior Brooks out of St. Francis Academy in Aliquippa, that's in Baltimore, but he's originally from Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. He is fresh back onto the market, just decommitted from Syracuse on Wednesday, and so Carolina is the first place that he is going to visit. Now, there is some confusion as to whether or not he is somebody that is on campus this weekend. I think he was one of the guys I know he was one of the guys that was listed for Inside Carolina. So I think he is visiting this week. 24/7 Sports lists him as a guy that's visiting next week. So regardless, he is going to be on campus at some point. I would almost prefer that it was next week and that he did not go to any other schools, because that would mean there are no other openings. But I believe he is on campus this weekend, meaning there is one more opening next weekend where he could potentially drop a school in there, take an official visit to. But the good news is this is very similar to Trenard Roberts, who Carolina had on campus last weekend, where it seems like his recruitment is being reset. And Carolina is the first school that gets an opportunity with him. So can Carolina take advantage of that? We'll see whether or not they are. I would imagine that Roberts is probably the guy that Carolina would prefer over Brooks. But either way, I think Carolina would probably be okay with a commitment at that position, another commitment at that position to go along with Isaiah Stevens, probably a more complete back, where Stevens is going to be more of that explosive back. I think Carolina might be looking for someone that can provide a little bit more complete of a game at that running back spot. And so I'll be interested to see whether or not Carolina continues to push hard here at the running back position. It seems like it. They've had a lot of guys on campus here during this month. And so, getting Brooks on campus, I think, shows that's a very important position that they are hoping to add at least one more commitment to. And so maybe Senior Brooks ends up being that guy when it's all said and done. You've got interior offensive lineman Cooper Hodson out of Providence Day High School or Providence Day School in Charlotte, North Carolina. He officially was expected to officially visit Chapel Hill next weekend, but decided that he was moving it up to this weekend. As of right now, still his only scheduled official visit. So that's the reason why Carolina's in the lead, because I don't know if this is a commitment that they are necessarily willing to take over any of the guys that they have right now. Maybe they are looking to add a fourth commitment at this position. Maybe they really feel like investing at the interior offensive line spot. Again, some of these guys could kick out to offensive tackle, but regardless, even if you do end up landing his commit, that'd be 5 commitments along the offensive line in general. And they probably are looking to add another guy with some significance to the offensive tackle spot. So I think the question becomes, if this is the only official visit that he is taking, is Carolina willing to accept his commitment? East Carolina is another school that's popped up all of a sudden. Maybe they're a team that ends up getting an official visit from him next weekend. But right now, it looks like Carolina's in the driver's seat. They just have to determine whether or not they actually want to park the car and take the commitment. I think that's going to be the thing that we're going to see this weekend. Don't think Carolina really has to go above and beyond here. I don't think this needs to be a mind-blowing type of official visit for them to end up landing him. So that's one that Carolina may not have to focus on nearly as much as some of the other guys in this class. Now you get to the guys that we look at, we say are toss-ups. In the article that we have up on the website, you can go and read that over there at HeelToughBlog.com. That's where you get to Zion White, 3-star wide receiver out of Mililani High School in Honolulu, Hawaii. He is now officially transferring back there. Was a guy that was at IMG Academy, was successful at IMG Academy, wants to go back home. As you can tell, distance is already going to be a concern. Now, the thing is that we are in a much different age. If you can pay the money, there are a lot of guys that don't necessarily care about the distance from home. This could be one of those things where he doesn't necessarily look at it as an issue. He could be coming back home to sort of prepare for having to move away from home to play college football. He's going to have to do that regardless. So maybe he just wants to spend one more year on his home island before eventually moving and playing college football here in the lower 48. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see whether or not Carolina has a chance. Now, the thing is that this recruitment this visit, not sure if this is even happening. He doesn't have anything on social media, but he was a guy that was listed as someone that Carolina was going to be hosting this weekend. He is not committed anywhere else. So I think that's one of the main reasons that we decided to put him in this group. Hopefully he is on campus for Carolina. But if he is, then this recruitment comes down to the next 10 days. He's a guy that's going to cram 3 official visits into that time frame. The Tar Heels have held on to their official visit the entire time. I was shocked. I thought this would be a guy that would back off of the official visit at some point. Not sure if it's actually happening, though, as of right now. But if it is, then that's huge for Carolina. California is the other school that I think you look at and feel like has the best chance to be able to land him. Maybe that turns out to not necessarily be the case, but it feels like California is the team that right now has the best chance to land him, closest to home, not to mention they are a school that is, on the right track in terms of trending up for him. And then Washington is where he is going to take his other official visit. That'll be June 19th for him. So, look, there was a report that came out on him just a couple of weeks ago that he was moving back to his high school in Honolulu. Carolina was still listed as a school that he was going to make a visit to. So there is a chance that he is on campus. There's a chance that he's not. Carolina, they definitely look like they want to land at least one other commitment in this class. You look at, the Rivals prediction machine, they are given a 33.1% chance to land his commitment. California, the only team that's slightly ahead of them. So hopefully Carolina can, get him to campus. Hopefully he's on campus right now. Hopefully they're showing him everything that they need, because it feels like they are looking for at least another commitment at the wide receiver position. Again, you've got one commitment in this class at wide receiver, but it's probably the most mysterious commitment that I have ever remembered being a part of for Carolina. That would be Skylar Robinson, who is, as of right now, is still committed to Carolina. I have no idea what direction this is going in. There are no other schools that report official visits with him at this point to On3. I will check 24/7 Sports here really quickly, but I don't think that there is going to be anything different there, because there hasn't been anything for a while. He has transferred high schools, now playing at Chaminade High School in West Hills, California. And yeah, as of right now, no official visits scheduled for the month on 24/7 Sports. So this is a guy that's staying locked in to Carolina right now. But again, his brother was on the roster last year. He was a guy that ended up entering the transfer portal during this offseason. And so I think naturally we all thought, yeah, we're probably going to end up losing his commitment here at some point, and Carolina's going to have to find another wide receiver in this class. That has not happened at this point. So it looks like the slot receiver position for right now, Carolina is working with a guy that's going to be there. This is a position that they're probably going to have to reset with. It doesn't feel like any of the guys that they've had on campus they've really made any sort of waves with at the wide receiver position. The only other guy that they have is Anthony Williams. That was one that you were hoping Carolina would have landed by this point. He still is going to take an official visit to Liberty. He's still going to take an official visit to Virginia Tech, but there hasn't necessarily been a ton of news on him since his visit. I think Inside Carolina wrote an article on him, but he wasn't necessarily one of those guys that, I looked at and said, man, Carolina, based off of what he said, he's guaranteed to be a commitment. I think Carolina is still in a good spot, but, this is also another guy that is a little bit underrated, is, someone that hopefully is going to develop into a really good player for Carolina, but there are smaller schools that are after him that can probably offer him more playing time. So we'll see what exactly happens. Zion White, of being a 4-star prospect, this is the type of guy that could come in, could be a part of their wide receiving core almost immediately, which is something that I still think Carolina is going to look for at the wide receiver position just about every year. And so I will be interested to see if Zion White did actually take his official visit to campus. Now you've got 4-star linebacker Theo Wilson out of Armwood High School in Tampa, Florida. This is a guy who was supposed to be on campus last weekend. He ended up pushing his official visit to this weekend. And look, Carolina, and granted, ends up getting him to campus because Ronald Moore, who was the other guy that Carolina was hoping to do the same exact thing with on the interior of the offensive line, he did not make it to campus by all indications. So Theo Wilson getting there is a big step for Carolina. He took his official visit to Louisville last weekend, which means he's just changed the schedule around just a slight bit. Virginia is the other school that he has visited to this point, and they have to feel at least decent about where they stand, because it feels like this recruitment still pretty wide open at this point. He was another guy that at one point had to reset his commitment or his recruitment, and so that's how he got to the group that he has now. He does have an official or a crystal ball prediction from 24/7 Sports that was cast right as he arrived to campus last week with Louisville. The thing is that he hasn't committed yet, and he has made it to Chapel Hill. He's got the official visit with LSU that he still has to make. So those are good signs for Carolina that he is continuing his official visit schedule, that he didn't just commit to Louisville this week after taking an official visit there like a few other guys did. Kason Mallard was one of those guys that was supposed to be on campus for Carolina this week that ended up committing to Louisville following his official visit. So I think, good signs for Carolina that they're able to get him on campus. Now, can they stand out? That's going to be the most important thing for Carolina here this week. Do they show him something that he hasn't seen at some of these other schools? Do they value him a little bit more than some of these other schools do? I think that's going to be one of the most important things for Carolina to prove to him if they are going to end up landing his commitment. I think that they've got a decent shot at it because, again, they do have 3 commits at the linebacker spot, but that is going to be a position of need this upcoming season. Wilson, 6'2", 220, guy that's built probably a little bit more ready for the college game than some of the other guys that Carolina is bringing in. So maybe that's the pitch to him. We'll just have to wait and see whether or not Carolina can get it over the finish line. You have 4-star defensive lineman Caden Robinson Vickers from Dunlin High School in Dunlin, Florida. This is another one that I got to tell you, I'm shocked that he's actually made it to campus. I thought with some of the other official visits that he had scheduled that there was almost no way that he ended up making it to Chapel Hill. He has now, and Carolina now has a legitimate shot at him because he is basically down to 3 schools. He has taken the official visits to NC State. He does, I think he has already taken an official visit to Central Florida. If not, then it is next week. And so regardless, I think when you look at it, it's coming down to these 3 schools. And I think Carolina, has a chance here to be able to actually land that commitment. He seemed, genuinely pleased with both visits, but neither one of those visits were mind-blowing to the point where he actually ended up committing based on those. So Carolina gets the opportunity. Now it's about Carolina showing that he will be a valued piece. I think it should be relatively easy. Carolina's got 2 guys that are going to be upperclassmen this year along the offensive front. Or no, I think Leroy Jackson is just a sophomore, but he's a guy who could be gone to the NFL sooner rather than later. And so you will have guys that are moving out of this program here soon, and there's going to be opportunities to be a part of that rotation there at the defensive line spot. It's also a spot where they do rotate 4 guys. So if you're talented enough, you're going to be able to stand out. And you'll have a chance to be able to play. And so hopefully that's what Caden Robinson Vickers looks at and thinks is a good fit for him. Carolina, it all comes down to this weekend. It feels like if they find a way to impress him, then maybe they can end up being the team that he ends up picking. If not, it'll be the 2-team race to whenever he actually ends up making his commitment. So hopefully Carolina's done everything that they've needed to do to this point to end up landing his commitment. Right now, Central Florida, who did host him back on May 29th, and NC State are seen as teams with just a slightly better chance to land him than Carolina. But this weekend could go a long way to proving where exactly Carolina stands in that recruitment. Still think it's a toss-up at this point, if I had to say. You go to the guys that are probably heading elsewhere, that would be 4-star edge rusher Braden Booth out of South San Antonio High School in San Antonio, Texas. Tar Heels have made a strong push with him. They've been doing it really throughout the state of Texas, as we've seen. They positioned themselves well earlier this offseason, but Baylor is a team that has been in the driver's seat for him for a long time. I don't think that's changing by any stretch here over the next handful of days, unless Carolina just absolutely has one of the best official visits they've had of this cycle. Maybe it's possible. The fact that he is taking the visit, I think, is a good sign and shows that there is still an opportunity here for Carolina, but it really needs to be a great showing to sway him away from the in-state school. That probably is going to give him some decent playing time. So Carolina would love to have an edge rusher committed in this class. As of right now, they currently do not have an edge rusher committed in this class. I think that's something with Donovan Hoylett leaving after the season is over. He will graduate. Most people feel very confident that Milcard Abujide will be a guy that will be going to the NFL. He was just named a first-team All-American, or not first-team All-American, fourth-team All-American by Phil Steele, preseason first-team All-ACC member by Phil Steele in his magazine. We'll, of course, be talking to Phil later on this offseason, so we'll ask about him. But there's a lot of people that feel like he will not be around in Chapel Hill beyond next year, but beyond this upcoming season. And so, for Carolina, they've got to get some guys at this edge rusher position. They have not done a good job so far in this class. That's one position that I've been very disappointed with what Carolina has done. They just haven't been able to get any guys even really on campus. Braden Booth is really that one guy that they've gotten besides Andrew Rogers, the in-state guy, who now seems to be trending towards Tennessee after it looked like Carolina was in a really good spot with him. They never got Aaliyah Wolfgram to campus, a guy that they were recruiting at one point. Maybe James Harris Jr. is someone that they end up finding a way to land, but that's a guy that, again, is going to have to be very is going to have to be developed. It's probably going to take some time. So you'd love for them to get a significant commitment here. They're going to have to really show that they are desperate to be able to land someone like Braden Booth, I think, to be able to overtake Baylor in this recruitment. And maybe they bring that to the table this weekend. We'll just have to wait and see. Then you have a guy that is committed elsewhere. That is Nazir Pitchford out of Palmetto High School in Palmetto, Florida. He ended up committing to Kansas last weekend on Sunday, following his official visit there. Well, there are people already predicting that he's going to flip to Carolina. So very weird circumstance for Pitchford. If he ends up flipping his commitment, that's, not necessarily the greatest thing, from a reputation standpoint that you end up committing, but then end up flipping your commitment only a week later. Regardless, Carolina would take it because cornerback is another position that you feel like Carolina wants to land at least one commitment, even if they do roll with a D. Willie as their starting corner this year. He is going to be a guy that's only there for a year. And then there are questions about the rest of the guys. Jalen Thompson, upperclassman. Jaden Patterson, upperclassman. So there's guys that are a little bit older. Caleb Cost, also an upperclassman. So Carolina looking for a commitment at that cornerback spot to go along with Trey Johnson. Johnson, a guy that will be able to play on the outside, but they would probably like to have at least one more guy in there that they can count on in this class. Pitchford would be a guy that, they jumped in on in the month of April, really were making a push for him. And then when he ended up committing to Kansas, a little bit of a surprise. So Carolina is hoping that they're able to convince him to flip this weekend. I think there's a good chance that it does end up happening based off of some of the stuff that I've heard here. So if that is the case, then Carolina will have their second cornerback commit of the class. I think that might be the number that they take, because, again, they're not taking a huge class this time around. It's just not happening. They're going to look at a smaller class after what they did this past year. All the guys that they ended up bringing in this past class, they're going to give a lot of those guys a chance to develop. And so it's not going to be a huge class. They're also going to leave room for transfers in a year where they feel like 2027 is their year to compete. So we'll see, but that would be a nice addition to that class as well at that cornerback position. So definitely a name to keep an eye on. All right, guys. Well, that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Make sure you head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Read all of the stuff that we've got up there. about the official visit weekend that we got going on right now. Goes a little more in depth than I just went right there. Also, we do have those commitment articles that you can go back and check out for all of those guys, even Chavez Dixon and Noah Spinks, who are on the last edition of the podcast. We'll be putting out some of those clips of us breaking, of me breaking those guys down for you. Those will be on the social medias here over the next handful of days, but make sure that you go back, check out that edition of the podcast too. We would greatly appreciate that. So much information in that podcast. That one was a confusing one. There was a lot going on. We had, a family crisis happening outside the hotel room door. Couldn't get into the hotel room, so I had to go unlock it in the middle of the podcast. Crazy podcast edition. So if you guys want to go back and check that out, you can. Also, as I mentioned, all those commitment articles are there on the website. It goes a little more in depth on each one of those guys that Carolina ended up landing here in the past week. Hopefully Carolina can continue that momentum and land some commitments that we'll be writing about, hopefully in a little bit more timely manner this week with me not on vacation. Also, make sure that you guys are keeping up with all of the latest going on with the team on the field. There will be the position previews that will be starting once we get through June 19th, that official visit weekend. We will then be starting to do some of those position previews. We're going to jump into it right in the middle of June. More, probably towards the end was when the podcast will start rolling out, but know that those are on the way and that we're getting prepared for this season. Getting you guys ready for this upcoming season is one of our biggest priorities. And any news that comes out here over the next couple of weeks, don't expect there to be any news, but maybe there will be some. We will have you covered on the website over there at HeelToughBlog.com. Also, make sure that you guys are checking out the coverage of the basketball program. Still got at least one scholarship spot open for this upcoming season. Wee Lin is a guy, a name to keep an eye on, the transfer guard out of Oregon. Is that still somebody that Carolina is interested in? It's been a little over a week since we've talked about him, so we'll see whether or not Carolina actually ends up landing him, or could they go with someone in the front court? You can check the articles out on Wee Lin, as well as some of the other guys that Carolina has been recruiting. There's one, Josh Hill, who came out of Robert Morris. That was another name that was on the radar. You can go back and read all about them on the website over there at Heel Tough Blog under basketball news. So make sure you go and check that out. Also, check out the latest edition of the Four Corners podcast, wherever you get this podcast, whether it is the Twitter page, the Facebook page, the YouTube page, or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can check that edition of the podcast out where we talk about Wee Lin. We tell you which one we think is more important, the backcourt or the front court, for Carolina to make an addition in to close out this roster if that is the last scholarship spot. So make sure you guys go back and give that a listen and watch. We would greatly appreciate that. And also, if you're still watching, we really do appreciate you guys for making it to this point of the podcast with us. But make sure that you go over to our YouTube page. Biggest thing that you can do right now, even if you're someone that watches on the Twitter page, we greatly appreciate it. We love if you watch over there on the Facebook page. But if you can, go over to our YouTube page, give us a subscription. It helps us so much. We're looking for sponsors, and that is one of the first things that they ask us now in this day and age of podcasting. How many YouTube subscribers do you have? We want to get that number to over 1,000. Currently at 868, so hopefully you guys can help us get there over the next month or so. We would greatly appreciate that. Want to be there at least before the start of the season for Carolina football if we can get there. So please help us out with that. Again, it's Heel Tough Blog on YouTube. Just hit that subscribe button and it will get you subscribed to our page and let you know whenever either one of the podcasts that are streamed to that page end up going live. But that is going to wrap it up for this edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening to this edition. And as always, go Tar Heels.